The purpose here is to give an overview and an introduction to the idea of computational workflow systems. As it says here, so these are often sometimes referred to as pipelines, but we'll use the terminology workflow throughout this video and throughout all this module. How do we take raw data and turn it into results? We generally, here's an example, input data files, for example, FASTQ sequence. The output ultimately could be a differential expressed genes, could be other things as well. And it is the standard in our field that most of the data we work with needs multiple steps to go from raw data to a set of answers. To demonstrate that, we'll take the simple example of RNA-seq, from which we would want to get differential expression according as would be implied by the data files here. In order to do this processing, what we end up seeing is usually at least 5 or 6 steps. We have quality control, you have the alignment and assignment of the reads to their original transcripts and genes, you have the merging and normalization of the output of these earlier steps into a complete matrix for all samples, and then finally you have some information that is generated in order to identify which transcripts, which genes are differential among the different samples. The arrows here represent the way the information flows as well as the order in which things happen in the process. And at each step of the way, there are a number of things that have to be specified. There are multiple choices of program usually that have been generated for each of these types of analyses. There are the program parameters that control the operation, that control how the program operates. And finally, there is, down here in red, you have the auxiliary information that is necessary in order to make these programs run properly. If we break this down and try to now capture this into what we refer to as a workflow, we usually start with the idea that each step of a process can be thought of as a module. These modules take input of the various sorts that I was talking about before. They run some sort of analysis and then generate outputs. And this is one step of the process. And so in order to capture this into a workflow, we have to have a way of specifying what the inputs and outputs are, and also how the information flows along. So if we put that into a larger picture, so now instead of a program, we have a complete workflow. And we can break that down into, this is a very simple workflow here, where we have 2 steps of this workflow, 2 modules. And you can see the arrows represent different pieces of information. Here we have the 3 inputs as specified up here, the 3 outputs down here. And this set of arrows specifies the way this information passes either from the outside world into the process or between steps of the process. And here I've highlighted just to draw your attention to the way these work. We have the way the inputs will feed into different steps of the program. We have the way the information, the output of one step becomes an input to a subsequent step. We have the final output that is generated from one or both of the steps. And finally, we have also the possibility of temporary outputs that are generated by these programs, but that we don't care about, so we allow them to be discarded after the analysis is done. The critical thing with this is that once your workflow has been stably established, it can be reused over and over again by just changing your input parameters. And this is part of why these are a source of, or a tool for reproducible work. So the basics of a workflow system, a workflow definition itself, which are usually languages that allow us to do this, a workflow definition includes what programs you're going to run and in what order. It also specifies how the information flows either into the workflow, for example, the data, the parameters, the resources. It specifies how you pass the information between the steps of the workflow, and finally, how you come back out of the workflow again. The workflow engine is the program that actually takes this information and implements it. And as it says, it implements the specified workflows. It maps the computational needs defined by the workflow to the available resources of the computing system. And as noted down here at the bottom, they're generally platform specific. Most of the workflow engines have workflow systems have engines that are run on multiple different platforms, multiple computing environments. Workflow systems have several advantages, and this is why we're working with them. The first, I've already noted, they're reproducible. Once you've defined your steps, you know that you can reproducibly carry them out again. All you have to do is either change your inputs or alter them so that you can get a new analysis, but with exactly the same defined set of steps. As you'll note, there were several steps. There's a lot of passing of information. There's naming things. So if you have it coded into a workflow, you have reduced your chances of making mistakes. As noted, most of the workflow systems have been implemented on multiple platforms. That allows you to take your workflow and compute it where it's convenient or to share it with colleagues. And finally, that leads to my last note. This allows for reuse of community knowledge and effort. Most of the workflow systems that are available have repositories of workflows that have been identified, that have been defined and vetted and had feedback. These are available for us to download and use once we learn the definition and learn the proper inputs for them. And I'll just close out here with a listing of several of the popular descriptions along with their links. We're going to work with Nextflow in these modules, but all of these are good systems. They all have communities that support them. And so it really is to your benefit to learn to use workflows and include them in your analysis.